actor Chuck Norris is dead. The Norris family confirmed his passing on social media, saying he died yesterday morning, but didn't mention how. Norris was a world-class martial arts champion. He famously fought Bruce Lee in the 1972 film Way of the Dragon.
He was never just a fighter, and he was never just a movie star. The real question around Chuck Norris is how one man managed to exist simultaneously in three different worlds. The brutal reality of martial arts competition in the 1960s, the stylized violence of Cold War-era Hollywood action cinema, and the surreal exaggeration of internet mythology where facts stopped mattering and legend took over. His legacy doesn't sit neatly in one category. Today, we'll explore the untold legacy of Chuck Norris. It's truly mind-blowing. From Air Force cadet to martial arts obsession. In the late 1950s, Chuck Norris, who had lived through a troubled childhood ever since his parents' divorce, enlisted in the U.S. Air Force and was stationed in South Korea at Osan Air Base. It was there, far from American sporting culture, that he first encountered Tang Soo Do, a Korean martial art emphasizing striking, discipline, and structured forms. What began as physical training for off-duty hours quickly turned into something more consuming. He trained under Korean instructors who emphasized repetition, control, and mental focus, often practicing in conditions that were far removed from the glamour that martial arts would later carry in Western media. In this environment, Norris was not yet a champion or instructor. He was a student, absorbing a system that demanded precision over recognition. When he left military service and returned to the United States in the early 1960s, he did not return with a conventional career plan. Martial arts in the U.S. were still fragmented, often separated into rigid schools that guarded their techniques closely. Korean and Japanese systems existed, but they were largely confined to niche dojos and ethnic enclaves. Norris was thus an outsider, a former serviceman, no institutional backing, trying to establish credibility in a field that valued lineage as much as skill. Not an easy start, is it? He began competing in karate tournaments across California. Defeats hit him straight early on, including losses to more established fighters who were deeply rooted in traditional styles. Instead of retreating into a single discipline, Norris began studying across systems: karate, judo, and later taekwondo. This approach was unusual at the time, when martial arts schools often discouraged cross-training. By the mid to late 1960s, Norris had become one of the most recognized competitors in American point karate circuits, eventually winning multiple national titles. He was consistently ranked among the top fighters in professional karate tournaments in the United States. His reputation grew not just from victories, but from adaptability, his willingness to adjust tactics mid-fight based on opponents' styles. At the same time, he began teaching martial arts in Los Angeles. His dojos attracted students from outside traditional martial arts circles, including celebrities and actors. This exposure gradually shifted his trajectory again, moving him closer to Hollywood without initially seeking it. But even before film or fame entered the picture, his identity had already transformed. He was no longer a serviceman or a struggling competitor. He had become a hybrid figure. Norris was not yet a global icon, but the foundation was already set. The fight that changed everything. In 1972, the trajectory of Chuck Norris shifted in a way that no tournament circuit or dojo promotion could have engineered. Until that point, he was known primarily within martial arts circles in the United States as a competitive karate champion and instructor based in Los Angeles. Hollywood had not yet defined him, and global audiences had no reason to recognize his name. That changed when he was cast in Way of the Dragon, a Hong Kong martial arts production directed by and starring Bruce Lee. By the early 1970s, Chuck Norris had already built a reputation that most audiences never saw. In Los Angeles, he wasn't a celebrity yet. However, his students included high-profile names like Steve McQueen, and his dojo had quietly become a meeting point between martial arts and Hollywood. At the same time, across the Pacific, Bruce Lee was reshaping cinema itself. When Lee began planning Way of the Dragon, he wasn't looking for an actor to play his final opponent. He was looking for a real fighter. That decision led directly to Norris. The two already knew each other through the martial arts community, and Lee understood exactly what Norris represented: size, structure, and controlled power. At around 5 feet 10 inches and over 170 pounds in fighting shape, Norris brought a heavier, grounded style that contrasted sharply with Lee's speed and fluidity. This contrast was the entire point. Lee designed the final fight not just as a climax, but as a visual argument between two philosophies of combat. The sequence was filmed in Rome's Colosseum, a location chosen as much for symbolism as spectacle. Production in 1972 was physically demanding. Long takes, minimal stunt doubling, and choreography that required both men to maintain precision under real fatigue. Unlike many fight scenes of the era, this one avoided rapid cuts and camera tricks. The tension was built through pacing. The fight begins cautiously, with both men testing distance and timing. Norris's character, Colt, stands upright, composed, relying on traditional karate stances. Lee's character circles, studies, and waits. Then the rhythm shifts. Norris lands early, using reach and strength to control space, forcing Lee backward. For a moment, the film allows the audience to believe that power might dominate. But Lee adapts mid-fight, lowering his stance, increasing mobility, and introducing unpredictability. There's a subtle but critical moment where Lee begins to bounce lightly on his feet, abandoning rigid form altogether. It's a turning point. What follows is escalation without chaos. Every strike has visible weight. Every reaction is earned. Norris's breathing becomes heavier, his movements slightly slower. These small details signal realism rather than choreography. Lee, in contrast, becomes sharper as the fight progresses, exploiting openings created by fatigue. The sound design, with amplified strikes and controlled silence between exchanges, adds to the sense that this is less performance and more controlled combat. After a decisive sequence of kicks and counters, Lee defeats Norris, but the tone doesn't shift into celebration. Instead, it becomes almost solemn. Lee's character pauses, acknowledging his opponent before covering his body. That scene did more than elevate a film. It redefined expectations. Over time, the scene became one of the most analyzed martial arts sequences in cinema history, studied for its pacing, framing, and contrast in fighting styles. For Norris, it marked an irreversible shift in public identity. Until then, he was primarily known within competitive karate circuits and regional martial arts communities. After the film, he was suddenly visible to international audiences, associated with a global martial arts icon whose influence was rapidly expanding. Behind the scenes, the collaboration also altered how Hollywood perceived him. In the early 1970s, action cinema was still developing its language for martial arts representation. Casting directors and producers were beginning to recognize the value of authenticity in fight choreography. Norris's performance in Rome demonstrated that he was not a stylized actor learning fight moves for the camera, but a trained competitor with real timing and impact control. This distinction mattered in an era when many screen fights were still heavily staged or doubled. The credibility he earned from that single role positioned him as a rare asset, someone who could bring legitimate combat experience into film production. The film's release also had an indirect but lasting effect on Norris's career trajectory. While he did not immediately become a leading Hollywood star, he gained access to a new tier of opportunities. Martial arts instructors were no longer confined to dojos or tournament circuits. They were becoming part of the entertainment industry's evolving action genre. Norris transitioned into that space gradually, later appearing in roles that emphasized military discipline and lone wolf hero archetypes. But the foundation of that identity was already established in Rome. Hollywood Rise and the Action Hero Blueprint. The shift from martial artist to full Hollywood action unfolded through a sequence of roles that steadily redefined what an American action hero looked like in the late 20th century. When Chuck Norris stepped into Good Guys Wear Black in 1978, he was carrying an entire film on his shoulders for the first time. The story itself taps directly into the political tension of the post-Vietnam era, where unanswered questions and covert operations still lingered in the public imagination. Norris plays John T. Booker, a former member of an elite U.S. Special Operations team sent on a secret mission in Southeast Asia under the promise of safe passage, only to discover later that the mission had been part of a political deal that left them exposed and expendable. Years after the mission, Booker is back in the United States trying to live a quiet civilian life. But the past doesn't stay buried. One by one, members of his former team start turning up dead under suspicious circumstances. These are not random killings. They're meant to erase every surviving witness to that classified operation. Booker begins investigating the deaths. The film gradually reveals that the original mission wasn't just a military operation. It was tied to a secret diplomatic agreement, one that certain powerful individuals are still trying to protect years later. The deeper Booker digs, the clearer it becomes that he isn't just being hunted by assassins, but by a system that has already decided he should not exist. What made Good Guys Wear Black significant wasn't just its plot, but how it positioned Norris within it. He wasn't playing a side character or a martial arts showcase. The film proved that he could anchor a story built on tension, betrayal, and survival, not just physical combat. It was the moment Hollywood stopped seeing him as the fighter from that Bruce Lee film and started recognizing him as a leading man capable of carrying an entire action narrative. The late 1970s and early 1980s marked a shift in American cinema. Action films began moving away from ensemble war dramas toward individual hero narratives shaped by post-Vietnam sentiment and Cold War tension. Norris's screen presence fit this evolution precisely. His characters were often former military operatives, special forces veterans, or lone agents returning to confront unfinished missions. Unlike earlier cinematic heroes who relied heavily on dialogue or wit, his roles emphasized physical decisiveness and moral clarity. That blueprint solidified in the 1980s with films such as Missing in Action in 1984 and The Delta Force in 1986. In Missing in Action, Norris portrayed Colonel James Braddock, a former prisoner of war returning to Vietnam to recover missing American soldiers. The film resonated strongly with Cold War-era audiences, particularly in the United States, where Vietnam War memories and unresolved political sentiment still shaped cultural narratives. In The Delta Force, Norris worked alongside Lee Marvin in a story inspired by real-world hijacking incidents, including the 1985 TWA Flight 847 crisis. The film leaned heavily into the idea of elite military intervention teams acting decisively when political systems stalled. While critics were divided on its portrayal of geopolitics, It reinforced Norris's screen identity: controlled intensity, minimal emotional fluctuation, and precise physical action under pressure. These traits became consistent markers across his filmography. Throughout this period, Norris's roles contributed to a broader cultural pattern in American action cinema: the lone operator archetype. By the early 1990s, this film-driven identity transitioned into television, where it reached its most sustained form with Walker, Texas Ranger, which premiered in 1993 and ran until 2001. Unlike his earlier films, the series allowed for long-term character development and repetitive moral frameworks across episodic storytelling. Norris played Cordell Walker, a Texas Ranger who combined traditional law enforcement with martial arts expertise, often resolving cases through direct confrontation rather than procedural complexity. The show's scale amplified his global recognition significantly. Running for 8 seasons and producing over 200 episodes, it achieved international distribution across more than 100 countries, making it one of the most widely syndicated American action series of its era. What made this phase of his career distinct was its consistency across media. Whether in cinema or television, Norris maintained a stable character identity: restrained speech, controlled physicality, and immediate escalation when justice was threatened. This uniformity became his signature. But with fame, controversies followed soon enough. The man behind the curtain. By the time Chuck Norris had become a global action icon, his public image had already begun to split into 2 versions: the documented fighter and the mythic figure built through media repetition and internet culture. While Norris did compete extensively in professional point karate circuits in the United States and earned recognition as a top-ranked fighter of his era, many of the more extreme statistics attributed to him, such as claims of him being undefeated, were not consistently verified across independent archival sources from that period. The ambiguity came partly from how fragmented martial arts record-keeping was in the 1960s and 1970s. Unlike modern combat sports with centralized databases and regulatory bodies, karate tournaments in the United States were often organized by different associations, each with its own ranking systems and documentation standards. Norris's success was not in question. He was indeed a highly accomplished fighter, but the exact numerical framing of that success varied. The gap between documented history and popular storytelling widened further as Norris transitioned into Hollywood fame. His roles in films such as Missing in Action and The Delta Force, along with his long-running television series Walker, Texas Ranger, reinforced a screen persona of near invincibility. This cinematic identity eventually fed back into public perception, blurring the line between character and real-life biography. Critics and commentators pointed out that this blending of fiction and reality contributed to the emergence of the unstoppable Norris archetype, which was more cultural construction than historical record. Then there was politics. During the 2012 U.S. presidential election, Norris publicly endorsed Mitt Romney and released a video warning that if Americans did not vote to remove Barack Obama from office, the country could face what he described as 1,000 years of darkness. Norris later clarified that the comment was metaphorical, but it was still interpreted by critics as extreme political rhetoric. He also wrote opinion columns over the years, particularly for conservative outlets such as WorldNet Daily. In those columns, Norris consistently emphasized themes like limited government, individual responsibility, and strong national defense. For example, he argued that the U.S. Constitution should be interpreted strictly and warned against what he viewed as government overreach. In one column, he wrote that Americans must stand up for freedom before it's too late. Norris also spoke about the importance of religion and faith in public life, often referencing Christianity as a guiding influence in his personal decisions. In interviews and writings, he emphasized family structure, discipline, and moral accountability as foundational to society. Despite these clear positions, Norris generally avoided direct participation in electoral politics. He did not run for office, nor did he maintain a continuous role as a political commentator in mainstream media. The reaction to these positions was divided along predictable lines. Supporters viewed him as someone using his platform to defend traditional values and constitutional principles. Critics argued that some of his statements contributed to political polarization or oversimplified complex issues. What stood out, however, was consistency. His personal life also unfolded with the same intensity and quiet contradictions that defined his public image. In December 1958, in Torrance, California, an 18-year-old Norris married Diane Holacek. The two were high school classmates stepping into adulthood before either had any idea of the life ahead. What followed was a marriage that stretched across 3 decades, from his uncertain early years through his rise in martial arts and into Hollywood visibility. They had 2 sons, Mike in 1962 and Eric in 1965. Building a family, even as Norris's career demanded constant movement. But by 1988, after 30 years, the foundation fractured. The separation became final in 1989. Yet even within that earlier chapter, there were hidden threads that would only surface years later. During his time in the U.S. Air Force, stationed in California, Norris had a relationship he kept secret, one that resulted in the birth of his daughter, Dina. For decades, that part of his life remained unspoken. This was until 1990, when father and daughter met for the first time. It wasn't until 2004, in his memoir Against All Odds, My Story, that he publicly acknowledged her, turning a private truth into a permanent part of his story. By then, his life had already shifted again. In 1998, he married Gina O'Kelly, a model 23 years younger than him, whom he had met just a year earlier under unexpected circumstances. Their relationship brought a new beginning, and in 2001, they welcomed fraternal twins. By 2017, Norris had 13 grandchildren, and then in March 2026, the story reached its final, abrupt turn. While in Hawaii, he suffered a sudden medical emergency and was hospitalized. On March 19th, at the age of 86, he died. His family confirmed the news the following day, choosing to keep the cause private. It was a quiet ending for a man whose life had moved through conflict, fame, secrecy, and reinvention. No final spectacle, no public unraveling, just a closing chapter that, like much of his life, left certain details unsaid, while the larger legacy remained impossible to ignore. Speaking of his legacy, a life worth remembering. By the later stage of his career, Chuck Norris had moved beyond traditional stardom into something closer to cultural myth. His appearance in The Expendables 2 wasn't about an introduction. It was recognition, a nod to a persona already amplified by the viral wave of Chuck Norris facts that had turned him into a global symbol of exaggerated strength and near invincibility. That internet mythology became a second legacy, blurring the line between the real fighter and the larger-than-life figure audiences believed in. Behind that myth, however, stood a structured and lasting martial arts contribution. Norris founded American Tang Soo Do in 1966 and later developed the Chuck Norris system in 1990, blending disciplines like karate, judo, taekwondo, and Brazilian jiu-jitsu into a hybrid system. Through the United Fighting Arts Federation, thousands of black belts were trained, with schools and practitioners spread worldwide. His approach reflected a broader shift toward cross-training years before mixed martial arts became mainstream. In Hollywood, his identity remained consistent: disciplined, restrained, and morally absolute, most clearly defined through Walker, Texas Ranger, and his action films. But what made his legacy unique was how its layers reinforced each other. The real martial artist gave credibility to the screen hero. The screen hero built global recognition, and the internet myth transformed both into cultural immortality. By the end, his legacy existed on all three levels at once: fact, fiction, and folklore. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Did you like this video? If you did, please consider liking, dropping a comment, and hitting the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on our new uploads. Also, don't miss this video you see on your screen right now. It's truly unbelievable.